Tim Doyle, welcome to the Down Round podcast. Now, before we get started, we're very much listener first here. We're listener focused. So we're starting, before we even ask who you are, what you do, I've got a listener question.
Go for it.
Okay. From Doug Thompson.
Oh, no.
Ask him about the time he drove me to Bankstown to play cricket and I vomited out the window the whole way. We were fielding, opened the bowling. I took 3 for 16 off 6. Best spell I ever bowled. Is this true?
I picked him up the night after. He lived around the corner from me. I picked him up the morning after a 21st he'd been at. He stunk the whole way. I think he demanded we stop at McDonald's and then vomited out my window down the side of my car. And then Penrith is a terrible, terrible place to play cricket. I think we're playing at Penrith and it's like 35 degrees. He's complaining the whole way. Glad to have him out of the car. And then all of a sudden he turns in. And like the spell of his life for him is not a very high bar because he bowled like 85 k's an hour max. Clearly he's still dining out on the story.
Well, thank you for that invigorating introduction to our guest today. We're joined by Tim Doyle. We've wanted to do an episode about health technology for a while, trends in like online health development. So we thought rather than going straight off the dome, as we tend to do. So we're joined by Tim. He's the founder and CEO of Eucalyptus. He was previously the head of marketing at Koala Mattresses. It's a no bad gig as well. Mattress in a box, how hard is that to sell?
I mean, it got hard.
I believe you. Yeah, so how about you start by giving us a bit of a introduction about why Eucalyptus was like your thing that you wanted to tackle?
Yeah, so Koala, I think like mattress company, but probably uniquely successful among mattress companies because solved like the convenience furniture problem beyond just the mattress problem. So like people, I think like the mattress became a commodity and what Koala did really well was ensured that when you moved apartment that you could get a mattress and be sure that it arrived on the same day. And so solving that problem for people for like an increasingly transient population meant that you could get the bed base, you could get the sofa, you could get a bit more of the house and that could build a pretty viable business. And then solving that convenience problem through some technology investment, not like enormous, but enough to make things simple and easy to track and easy to follow. Like things we take as standard in e-commerce now, Koala did that really well. And so was thinking about where technology and like a fragmented customer journey, if you compare that to like going to a Harvey Norman, to like where we could take that idea, where it was like solve a complex purchase cycle and build things that people want to use. We felt there was a lot of opportunity in health generally. And I think also at the same time, we were seeing a lot of American point solution healthcare businesses pop up that looked really similar. And so we felt that like the same infrastructure could run multiple of those point solutions in Australia and actually give us a better chance of building something holistic in health by building like multiple brands off one kind of shared services layer. Like I guess like imagine like the Shopify for health. And so those two insights together led to the start. And then it's kind of like COVID ramp and then figuring out what the real business is behind that over the last couple of years.
Okay, I have a million questions. Well, firstly, we should say, so like Eucalyptus, can you just quickly chuck us the brands underneath that? And
sure. So started with Pilot. Pilot is men's health, a lot of discretion-oriented stuff. So like large ED business, large hair loss business. I think the reason that that's first is because like very easy to solve for discretion with technology. And so great place to start. Kin, contraception and fertility management, a little bit more complicated because a lot of women aren't on the right contraceptive pills. So finding out the information from them and charting them to the right medication is a more difficult technology problem to solve with the help of the doctors. And so logical second step, software skincare brand has like personalization built into it. So people get different medications based on and different strengths of medication based on their symptoms and based on their photos. So building that, get a bit layer deeper. And then Juniper most recently is obesity management and also menopause and much more complicated again because you have like a lifestyle change challenge as well as the core medication prescribing challenge. So you end up having to build like an app and infrastructure that we otherwise didn't have. So I guess like think of infrastructure getting deeper into healthcare and then breadth of demographic expanding as that happens.
And the reason it's kind of all under this kind of layer of Eucalyptus, unlike I guess a lot of umbrella companies, you see it a little bit with P&G and whatever, it's not that common to have such a public face to an umbrella brand. But in essence, like, so they're running off basically similar systems. Is that the idea? The infrastructure is all kind of the same?
Yeah, I would imagine them as I would think of them as like clones of the same infrastructure running reasonably separate with like a single view of the patient sitting underneath them all.
Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. One thing that strikes me with all the brands is like, they're not like essential It's not like you go to a doctor, you get prescribed for, an illness, a transient illness that happens for kind of like a month or something.
Yeah.
That's obviously like an intentional strategic.
Yeah, I would say the reason that is like, why is it not instant scripts or like the long tail of medical prescribing? I think there are two reasons to do that. The first is there's a very clear like kind of like false economy that exists in telehealth for those type of conditions because people are used to going and getting that served from a GP at very low cost or like bulk billed if possible, So I don't think the business model there holds up that well.
Right, and it's like one-off basically, like you're cured, you're better.
Yeah, so you're like looking at $8 a margin, and I think that's a pretty scary spot to build a business. I think the second piece that's a little bit more deliberate is it's hard to provide continuity of care in those situations, so you end up having to be very shallow. You end up having to only really deal with people in a really short period of time because nobody gives a shit who the doctor is that is solving for their cold and flu kind of on the, or even like a medical certificate. It's a really common use case there. Whereas I think in our brands, what we've tried to do is pick conditions where they have like a requirement for ongoing management. And so that you can actually build a relationship with both the brand and the doctor and the kind of the pharmacy that you work with so that there's some lifestyle management around that can improve outcomes over time.
I feel like another kind of commonality between them and feel free to like say like, nah, that's not a thing, Raf. Just, you don't know what you're talking about. ED, hair loss, weight loss, and fertility is kind of slightly to the side, but like these are all things that people like. You don't need to necessarily solve them in that, right? Like you can go bald and still look
great,
still look
actually.
incredible.
Yeah.
I mean, ED, similar, basically. All these things you can kind of...
Well, you said just like basically discretionary, right? Like,
I think that's right. I wouldn't call that like a strategy for the long term of the business. I would say it is where private healthcare spend actually pools. And so when you typically have things that are more urgent or complicated to treat, the public system does a better job of finding ways to pay for that or serve you in those needs. And so our ambition over a 10-year timeline is to build many more of those type of services. But the reality is like the proof points required to start accessing public funding or providing care for complex conditions are very, very high. And so a lot of businesses, like a lot of, let's call it like more initially ambitious healthcare startups die of starvation on the way to regulatory approval or rebates or that type of thing.
Can you give us not a specific example of like a brand, but like what's the kinds of things they do?
Yeah, I think the whole space of digital therapeutics is a really common one where they fall over waiting. So like there's like a reasonable body of evidence for a whole lot of digital therapeutics around things like musculoskeletal recovery and there's really great mental health ones and the time to build the evidence base and then also to get doctors prescribing it and then from doctors prescribing it to the government supporting it, it can be 5 to 10 years.
Yeah.
And unless you have really strong commercials on the way in there isn't really a funding path. And so you end up seeing a lot of these great ideas dying in the really early stages as they wait for the system to change around them, which it just doesn't do.
Yeah, as opposed to ED, hair loss, weight loss. I'll get to weight loss in a second, but like these are, you kind of, got to keep taking these, right?
Yeah.
So
and
it's just recurring revenue.
You're just eating people's discretionary healthcare spend in order to fund the building of a platform that is capable of solving more complex problems for people over time. But if you don't eat that discretionary spend where it is, then it's very difficult to fund the build out of something that may take years. I mean, we're 5 years in and we're probably 30% of the way to something comprehensive.
And when you say comprehensive, what is that?
What's under that umbrella?
I think like the really good example to think about is like, how do you actually treat mental health meaningfully with digital tools, right? And so there's obviously a online psychology part of this. There's obviously a prescribing part of it. There's like a red button process because obviously like a lot of people who will gravitate to online mental health services are those at the like very serious end of the spectrum and the emergency end of the spectrum. You probably then do need digital therapeutics to lower the cost of access to care. So,
but you're talking more like the American model of like everyone has a therapist?
Yeah. But I think that's like what you're aspiring to in some ways. But to build it takes, like all of that infrastructure takes so long. And to do it in a way that is like the government isn't rebating those consultations to begin with, right? And so you have to build it in a way that lowers the cost of seeing a psychologist significantly. And so to get the platform to a point where it's capable of doing all of those things while also finding unit economics that make sense takes a long time. And so
this is the low hanging fruit. I know it's still very difficult. And
you're right. No,
it's worth
it's fair.
$500 million, but like it's the...
No, you're completely fair. We are deliberately low ambition while we build in order to make sure that we capture margin along the way.
Yeah. Because the other side of like long-term healthcare that comes to mind, like therapeutics that are sort of ongoing, is probably like pain management and things like that. Is that also...
I think another really good example, right?
Yeah, when can I get endone?
Yeah, a long way. That is like the lazy example for why telehealth needs to be regulated in a certain way, but you just can't get them.
Try and get endo on anyone.
Yeah. Or anything Schedule 4 or above. Anyway.
Yeah.
I think pain management is another really good one because it's like an obvious use case for this, right? It's
sure.
like it's the same
Recurring
thing more
revenue.
or less. Like, there's recurring revenue. There is like a series of lifestyle interventions that can make a massive difference. There is some like pharmaceutical solutions that are complicated and need constant management. It is obvious, but yet like I would not feel confident that any telehealth business in Australia or really internationally has the level of infrastructure required at the moment to make that like a really strong solution, better than or even like adjacent to seeing a GP regularly.
Yeah, cool.
Let's talk about pharmacies and whatnot. I think we're on record of being. Did we say openly that we're anti the pharmaceutical guild?
We're anti the pharmaceutical guild. Yeah, I don't think we're necessarily anti pharmacists. Well, maybe I don't know. I think we had.
Well, I got a bone to pick. The retail pharmacy, like the current system we have in Australia, where it's like you go to your pharmacist as well as getting whatever, like your antibiotics for your sinus infection or whatever. They've also got a host witch hazel and like cramp bark and shit like that, and they're selling you nappies. And I legitimately take my Amazon returns to my local pharmacy.
Yeah. You can make the pharmacist who's on 200K ring up your Pepsi Max, which is nice. You know?
Well, yeah, literally the pharmacist, like a pharmacist with a degree, gets my Amazon returns and tells me, "Oh, guys, not in the proper packaging." And anyway, but like that, I'm not trying to speak on behalf of you, but like any thoughts on the retail pharmacy as it currently exists in Australia? And
I mean, it's really interesting because of the impact Chemist Warehouse has had, right? So I think pharmacies used to be 70% prescriptions, 30% retail, and then Chemist Warehouse is 70% retail, 30% prescriptions, and so that obviously puts downward pricing pressure on the prescriptions, net good for patients, but puts pressure on pharmacists to build retail businesses alongside the medication management thing that they're supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
Which then pushes downward pressure on the experience around medication management. And so I think like there's a clear need to find a way to use the education of pharmacists to lift the standard of service people are being provided. And I honestly think like I'm like broadly supportive of pharmacy prescribing because I think that actually would be a really good way to like lower the GP burden, raise the output of pharmacists and make it less reliant on Pepsi Max to make a business.
Yeah. I mean, I know that you're solving one of these already, but it is actually like I only learnt this relatively recently that you still have to go and see a GP in order to get the pill, right? As a woman.
Yeah, remarkable, right?
Absolutely absurd.
There's an incredibly paternalistic statement in this as well where they go, well, it's a good opportunity to talk to the woman about her general health. And it's like, well, that's not applied to any other demographic.
Yeah, totally. But is that like not a direct kind of threat to the business? If pharmacies are able to start prescribing some of these things,
we would be using pharmacist prescribers. So like, I mean, we are a scale tool for the practitioner, like at some level, right?
I should go back a step. Do you have GPs working for you?
Yeah, we have 70 GPs, yeah.
And how does that all work? Are these working full-time for you or are they kind of, what's the deal?
I think like the easiest way to think about it is we run a digital clinic in like the very true sense of So the way that GPs are employed in a regular physical clinic is they are essentially independent contractors running their own schedule within that environment and have to produce a certain amount of revenue for the clinic by doing a certain amount of consultations. We run the exact same thing digitally. So a lot of our GPs are moonlighting, they're outside their normal hours, or mums on paternity leave. Maternity leave is the really, really common example as well.
Yeah, so, right.
And just that just because they have like freedom of schedule, because they can do the consultations whenever they want because they're like largely asynchronous. And so
yeah, like because I'm looking at your business. You've had a bunch of investment, and including when was the most recent round?
January.
Yeah, so this is most people are doing down rounds, name of our pod or whatever.
Yeah.
And
I did well. I mean, flat. So I mean, like when you get into the technicalities, it meets the title of the pod. Because if you raise flat,
well, that's why you're here, baby.
It actually is a tiny bit up. Like at a post-money valuation, it's significantly up. But like when you think about shares issued, the value of one share stays flat, and then you think the share pool being bigger. The company is worth more than when we raised last time.
Obviously, you're raising a bunch of cash. Is that mostly going into? I mean, what's going into?
Yeah, I think like building the platform is the main thing that we spend money on, and I think recently so I would call like years 1 and 2 like figuring out online prescribing, and like you need a patient-facing platform, you need a doctor-facing platform, and you need a pharmacy-facing platform, and then also an admin platform. So it's like reasonably complex to manage all of this stuff, and we spent probably 2 years building that, and then increasingly we're trying to build adjacent services onto the platform. So how do you build dietitian onto that core infrastructure? How do you build nurse practitioner? How do you build nurse? How do you build psychologist as roles that can deliver their services in a like single view? So in the app you have chat, and then in the chat you have multiple practitioners working on one person's profile.
Yeah.
Do they all see the information? Do they not? Can they like drop transactions into the app? Things like that. They become like quite complicated. Continuity of care is a complicated thing to build. Basically.
When you talk about continuity of care, is as like a patient, I'm not 100% familiar if you have this or not, but are you thinking more like a state where people are paying whatever, $99 a month or whatever, they get the prescription, but they also have effectively a dietitian or whatever, like they have this full holistic care that you're paying a subscription?
Specifically in obesity, yes.
Right.
I think like you don't need a full care team for erectile dysfunction. It probably wouldn't serve much purpose beyond the medication itself. But for obesity management, where you've got the drug, which is the drug is kind of like I would call it a trigger to weight loss. Like it drives quite a lot of weight loss, but it's doing it by lowering your appetite. And
it's one of those things, right, where like you stop taking it and
you're going to put the weight back on, unless you have made like significant lifestyle change. And so the great thing about these drugs, as opposed to the exact same thing happening on a diet, is that you do get the opportunity from you will lose the weight initially. And so if you're able to do that, you're in a much better place to then start the behaviors. So like your hunger will be less, your like ability to exercise significantly more. And so if you've done those things, then you can really hold the weight off. But for a lot of people who go back to normal eating habits, they're going to put the weight back on.
So is this like one of the big drivers of growth recently? I would imagine.
Yeah. I think that's publicly, like we've launched the brand in our main obesity brand. We've launched it in Germany, in the UK, about to launch it in Japan. So
is this Juniper?
Yeah, Juniper.
Yeah. But on the male side, I think it goes through pilot.
It goes through pilot, but there's a chance. I mean, the reason and you can't see, but I'm wearing all of these wearables and tracking everything is because we're thinking about what a more holistic male weight offering might look like outside of pilot.
Yeah, right. Because I know obviously this is like the big hype at the moment. Everyone's talking about liraglutide, and semaglutide is that's the one that everyone's hyped about, right?
Yeah.
And you've recently made the jump from
from liraglutide to semaglutide. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you want to just like run us through like what?
Yeah. So just, liraglutide, like kind of around for quite a long time, sold as the brand name Saxenda through the company Novo Nordisk here in Australia. Delivers 7 to 10% weight loss at, I think it's like 5 to 7 actually, percent weight loss at 12 months. And so great, but like daily injection, $400 a month, both inaccessible, but also like results to cost payoff, like not necessarily in line with the interests of a lot of people in Australia. So then you get...
Do you have a chart of that?
Yeah, we have lots of charts of that. Yeah. But then the exciting thing about the semaglutide kind of next molecule is it's being sold quite cheaply in Australia for diabetics. And then B, it's approved for weight loss through Wegovy, which is the next generation of the medication, which is being sold in America and in Germany, but not yet available in Australia.
Yep.
And it's significantly more weight loss. You're looking at like the 12 to 15% range, once a week injection, and more manageable cost-wise and probably side effect-wise over 12 months as well. So I think like that's the one that's driven the craze in America, and where Australians have scrambled to get access to whatever version of that they can.
Yep.
And what is it right now?
Ozempic.
Is it a shot?
Yeah, shot.
So what do you get as a patient?
So you get 4 needles. So there's one a week. The first month is just one actually, and then it's you get scales and some shakes and things like that as well, and access to an app and all that type of stuff.
Yeah, right. If you stop doing it, if you don't change your lifestyle, etc., the weight comes back on. Is there not incentive for you guys? Like, wouldn't you rather people stay on it?
I think if the drug was a particularly high margin part of the business, I think that would be the incentive. The reality is that it's a particularly low margin thing and people get sick of it anyway. And so if you don't build the service layer and have people paying for the service layer, you're actually never really going to be able to build a great business anyway.
So it's basically onboarding. It's like
I would think about it as that way. And then I think like ultimately, if all people want is the drug, they're going to go to the cheapest place to get the drug.
Yeah.
And so like we aren't going to be able to compete with, Super Pharmacy or whatever the online low-cost competitor is. And so we have to deliver something that is incremental weight loss over a 2-year period over and above the drug. Otherwise, the business doesn't really work.
Yeah, okay. Cool.
I'm interested in like your side of the perspective of this. Cause I know there's like a lot of stories recently about, Novo Nordisk not being able to meet demand for it.
Yeah.
At least initially, because all of a sudden it became kind of like the wonder drug, quote unquote. You have New York Times articles about this is the magic.
Do you reckon Trump's on it?
Elon Musk and Kim Kardashian on the same day.
Yeah, incredible stuff, folks. Is a release of supply the reason that you'd be able to start offering it? Is like, are they able to actually like
Yeah, so actually the reason we switched, to be honest, was Saxenda ran out in this country. And so the way that pharmacies buy medications is they buy them from pharmacy wholesalers, like API that West Pharma just basically bought is one of the big ones. And so our pharmacy network was telling us that they were unable to fulfill orders. And so we had 20,000 patients going, hey, what do I do now?
Yeah.
And so we were like, well, there's no Saxenda anywhere. There's plenty of Ozempic, it seems. And so the doctors, we kind of worked with the doctors to transition as many of those patients over to the best medication we could find for them at the time. And then obviously there's pushback against that because it's like there's a perception that it's taking away from diabetics. And I think like there's a couple of misconceptions to that as well. It's like, A, it's not a first-line medication for diabetes. Metformin is the first-line medication. And so there's alternatives for blood sugar control for diabetes. The second is like, I think it's like a bit of a strange quirk of society that says like diabetics more deserved of medication than obese people because obesity is like a lesser condition. And it's like, well, that's the path to diabetes for one, and two, it has far less effective medications available for it. So I think like the argument to be prescribing Ozempic is reasonably strong. And so I was broadly supportive of the doctor's positions on it. And I think like ultimately we want to get most people the medication that gives them the best chance of losing weight. And so it's kind of been the decision.
Yeah, cool. Coming back to the pharmacy question, because you were talking about how like on your side at least, you would be more than happy for pharmacists to be able to prescribe things, whereas GPs are normally prescribing them. But obviously the other side of the debate is the fact that pharmacists are not very happy about the telemedicine sort of stuff.
Yeah, they're not happy at all.
I mean, they're very rare. Like they're not a happy bunch generally. Like, it's hard to keep them
totally.
happy.
Yeah, so like how do you navigate that kind of stuff? Obviously that's a live debate right now. The idea that, you know, people like you guys and other online like telemedicine services that are prescribing services. Obviously it comes up a lot now because a lot of people are getting prescriptions for like CBD oil and cannabis via online.
Yeah. Have you seen how big the CBD oil prescribers have gotten? They're enormous businesses.
It does nothing, CBD. Yeah. I mean, I don't know what you guys take is, but my understanding is the science is like, it doesn't really do anything.
Yeah, it's weak at best, yeah.
I know it's like
the weed drug.
I should also say that like that you can get prescribed for like THC.
Yeah. You can get, and that's actually where all the growth is in the medical cannabis space generally.
Totally. Yeah.
Oh, great results coming through about K. You've been reading
but also so's MDMA. Like genuinely transformational mental health studies.
So what's
the K stuff was crazy.
What is the name of eucalyptus MDMA cannabis?
I
brand?
You're a brand
waiting
guy.
a little bit longer for the Geez, I don't know.
The pharmacists and everything, they're mad about online and telehealth and whatever. What's your response? They're mad because what? That lowers the barrier of entry. How do we know that? It's just people filling out a form. How do we can't oversight?
We can't sell any more Pepsi Max. We've hit our limit for how much we can sell.
Yeah, exactly. Nature's Own or whatever is like mad.
Yeah, I think look, this is going to sound like a little bit of a political answer, but I think ultimately it comes from a place of not knowing anything about the clinical governance behind these businesses. And like they pop up overnight and there's no general telehealth standards, right? So the three of us, if we had the time and the coding ability, we could build a Shopify store, do doctor phone calls, and had a doctor could do doctor phone calls, and then pipe out the scripts to pharmacies, and that would take us, sub a week. And there is like genuine clinical governance issues there that I think need to be solved because there is no set of standards that we're supposed to keep to. And so the absence of those means there are some seriously loose prescribers out there, and I can see the frustration because it's like, well, how are these people being held to account for their prescribing decisions? I'm having to solve for them when people come in with side effects, and that feels real. I think on the other side is like there's a lot of kind of like screaming about nothing because a lot of these businesses, and particularly the more mature ones, have like really substantial clinical governance investment as part of what they do. So like a mode of prescribing, and I think the one they get pissed off about most is asynchronous. That is neither safe nor unsafe. If you build the right systems and checks and balances into it, doing an onboarding form and then talking to a doctor over text is not really significantly different to where there's photos in the onboarding form. It's not significantly different to doing it in a 5-minute consultation in a GP. Like there are differences, but if you increase access 100x by doing that, the trade-offs probably do make sense. The conversation is very rarely about the trade-off. Like we get called like the McDonald's of medicine all the time. It's like that doesn't even make sense. Like it's not even really like a logical statement. And so I think like everything needs to get less screamy, and we need to kind of move to an actual governance system for this. But I think it is the nature of disruption in regulated industries is like the first thing that will happen is people will scream about safety because that's a lot of where the regulatory capture does come from. The
product itself, obviously, it doesn't make sense because like McDonald's, you're getting effectively the same product, but like the experience of McDonald's is actually very good. I don't want to sound like I'm fucking simping, by the way. This should be a hard interview, a hard-hitting interview, but like the experience of a doctor's office is not good. Like going to a doctor's office, having to fucking sit there in a shit chair and wait, and you get there on time. The time means nothing. Usually, like literally, I don't think it does often. Like once you get to the doctor's office at your time, you then get added to the queue. So you always have to wait. Like you never like walk in 1 minute before your appointment and then walk into your appointment. That just doesn't happen. It needed disruption.
Because of the waiting issue?
No, it's a shit experience. Whereas, and same as like, you know, if you go into a restaurant and you have to like sit down in some chairs and like wait to then get a table and you don't know how long it's going to take versus Macca's where, you know, you bang in, out.
Yeah.
I'm getting what I want. I know what I want. Like simple, I can order on a damn menu.
We can ask you, Macca's, yes or no? Are you a Macca's fan?
I'm a huge Macca's fan.
Well, there we go. Okay.
But I think
user
like,
experience is good.
but I think like if you extrapolate what you just said to like I think one of the really interesting things we always hear is like men don't go to the doctor. And it's like, well, is that true, or do men generally do not want to do a terrible experience and women are forced into it more through stages of their life where they desperately need medical support? And so my view is that like you build these shit experiences, and they are shit experiences, and I think like nobody in the medical community is disagreeing with that. You know, walking into a doctor's waiting room is not a good experience. You disincentivize people doing any health engagement at all, and then you then have all these downstream effects, which are like huge mental health problems within like the male population, huge obesity problems. And you go, well, why is this cohort so unhealthy? They don't engage with the healthcare system, and then we don't really make efforts to meet them where they are. And I do think that is a problem.
So Pilot, I've been watching the test. You know, what a series. And I've been seeing a lot of ads for Pilot on 9 Now. I don't know if you know, like, are they running just on 9 Now? Or are they on the actual TV as well?
And this is going to give away like inside baseball advertising stuff, but I don't think the streaming is priced properly. The 9 Now advertising, like
too cheap or too cheap?
It's too cheap. It's too cheap.
Oh, there's an arbitrage opportunity.
There almost certainly is.
Yeah.
Just because I don't think they price the scale of the audience very well. I think they're not doing a great job on the measurement side. And then I think media buyers generally are very prestige and status driven, and so like main broad, like if you're media buying for Woolworths or Coles, you're not walking into the meeting and being like, we found this $10,000 cheaper opportunity. It's like, were you bought one, break one of Origin? Yes or no? That's actually what all that matters.
Yeah,
they don't care about, a small upsell or whatever. So, okay, cool. That's why I'm seeing a lot of Pilot ads. So the ad starts, you've got a couple, the faces of a couple. I've seen it a lot of times. I usually only watch to the lunch breaks, but sometimes, you know, it's so compelling, I got to keep watching. A couple, seemingly, the outdoor couple, and off screen, you have a gentleman being like, they ask, any problem with the tent? Like, you know, how are you going with that tent, mate, basically? And obviously the metaphor here is like pitching a tent, etc. I get it. Goes over to him, funny comment. That guy who the actor is actually quite funny. I've seen him around, good actor. And he says, you know, his girlfriend laughs, whatever. He's like, it doesn't help when you laugh. But my point being, obviously all a big metaphor for pitching a tent.
Yeah.
But why does it start with the camera on like another couple? Is this like a kind of group sex situation?
I think it is. I think like it's adding to the pressure of the situation by implying it's a group sex situation.
It's an orgy.
Yeah, because it ends with the two guys together, right?
I can't remember the ending.
Yeah, I think the ending is that both men go into the same tent. So I do think from the beginning it is some kind of camping-related group sex scenario.
Oh, okay, that's good. I like that.
But now it's now going to get disapproved by the Channel 9 streaming people, so you've ruined my ad campaign and my
they're going to love it so much they bring it up to prime time. With no additional cost.
And the frequency just, like, that's the problem though. They don't do a good they don't have good frequency control on BVOD, so you probably have seen the ad too many times.
Well, I see it in a row. I don't know what they're doing over there. Yeah, you'll see it like 4 ad breaks in a row, but then you won't see it for an hour.
I know. So. I think that the technology that triggers those ads is pretty poorly built.
We've talked about this before about how seemingly like building out a video ad network is much harder than I think people give it credit for, and that KO is still friggin' struggling.
Unbelievable that they haven't managed to like price the inventory. You know the piece that when you like the KO screen loads and then under it it's like brought to you by Toyota Kazoo?
Yeah.
It's
crazy.
Like they clearly can't move that piece of inventory because like it's a great spot and Toyota Kazoo have had it the entire time.
Yeah, and the fill-in ads are like a stationary image of a Toyota.
Yeah.
As well as they still cut to like you're in an ad break and can't sell that inventory.
No, I think allegedly, so I asked about this on Twitter because I was like, what's going on here? Allegedly, it's when they're taking the American main feed and then it's an American ad that you can't show in Australia.
Yeah, right.
And so they can't serve over the top of it, apparently.
Yeah, okay, right.
That's
But they still, I mean, they were talking about doing an algorithmically generated like buy sell kind of marketplace years ago, and that's never actually happened.
It's the reason. Like the reason Meta is the business it is because it does.
It can do that. Yeah,
Like
yeah.
so,
They can do it at scale.
I'm kind of like unsurprised at something.
Yeah, totally. Well, actually, the next question I had was sort of related to big Titanic businesses like Meta. Obviously, the big example of a company that's really wanted to get into pharmacy, online health is Amazon.
Yeah.
And they've had like 5 cracks at it. And
Yeah.
They haven't quite been able to nut it out. But is there any concern on your part as sort of like, I guess you could say a smaller boutique brand that's very marketing driven and very like local market focused? Do you have any concerns that a company like Amazon will get into their particular approach to the way that they do sales and they do potentially prescriptions for something like, the weight loss drugs?
We're talking like a VC now.
Yeah.
I am talking like a VC.
It's a classic VC question, right?
And this is when you have to say, that's a great question.
Yeah,
And on the wearable side, Apple, etc.
Yeah. I mean, we've got Chemist Warehouse though. Like we have like one of the world's most effective discount pharmacies going already, and so I think like downward pricing pressure on medications is probably at close to its limit. Like I wouldn't think that Amazon is in a rush to come in and compete with Chemist Warehouse just because it doesn't have the hallmarks of the industries that Amazon like to play in. Like the reason it's so attractive to be in pharmacy in the US is because like very state-based, very fragmented, very few large national players that are able to provide telehealth services and pharmacy services effectively with the distribution network that you need. So like makes a ton of sense for them. Maybe makes less sense here. And it took us 10 years
of the pricing pressure from Chemist
Warehouse.
But you're also kind of selling the experience. And
and you've got to build it. So like for us to compete with Chemist Warehouse, it's not like we're going to be able to beat them on price. And we have to have some service layer on top of that. Like I think Chemist Warehouse has largely like broken the pharmacy business model for their own benefit, but the service element of pharmacy is gone. And so like if you've got like an eroding service element at the doctor's level and then an eroding service level element at the pharmacy, I think our job is to like think about how technology can bring back some level of service. And like actually Apple's probably the more interesting, more difficult competitor in that world because like if they will provide really effective health services over the next decade. Like they have the infrastructure now. It's a question of do they want to play local regulatory games with where they can provide advice, how they can provide advice, when they can prescribe, when they choose not to. And I think like
I can't imagine Apple ever prescribing.
No, exactly right. So
but
do we have?
I can see them having like on the more like holistic health subscription side
like
of things.
The mental health side of stuff. They're obviously going to move into that, and like there's evidence that that's like where they're thinking about for fitness and things like that. But yeah, in terms of prescribing and things like that, it seems like.
So where do we sit, right? I think we probably sit between those two groups, right? I think like we have to be. So if you think there is somebody coordinating information regardless, like so if Apple is the source of information and then pharmacies are the dispensing element and somebody sits between there as like the concierge of your health, I think that's where we view ourselves as having the biggest opportunity.
So in the wearables space, what's the plan there?
There's definitely no hardware plan, right?
Yeah,
it's like so we're building this performance brand at the moment, like a male performance brand. And as part of it, we did all these scans and kind of essentially just data inputs to begin with, blood tests, scans, all that type of stuff. And I think like super interesting. I'm wearing a Whoop at the moment to provide some more data. All the data in and of itself is very interesting, but like disconnected. I think the opportunity is to sit over the top of that and be like, well, this lack of sleep is correlating with the fact that you're doing this training, which is correlating with the fact that you're taking this medication. And that care coordination layer becomes more of an opportunity, I think, the more data inputs you have.
So let's go to the VC stuff. So you said a technical down round, but raw numbers kind of looks fine. What's the vibe like? What's happened? Why is everyone having down rounds right now? I mean, we know we've been saying obviously, but like, what's the vibe like actually? So your most recent raise, like, tell me what that experience was like.
Yeah. So
how was it different from the one?
So
before?
we raised right at the top, right? So we raised in December of 2021, November of 2021. So right at the top, and that was at I think it was like at the time like a 10.5 times revenue multiple for like a like what is essentially a D2C health business. So high, and obviously saw multiples collapse through 2022, and everyone knows that these multiples are collapsing around everywhere and falling to like what is like probably a more realistic level. And I think the challenge when you're sitting on a preference stack, an amount of cash, and a growth profile in the business is like, what is the combination of those three things that best positions you to be able to raise money again? And so in end of 2021, it's growth at all costs, right? So you've really geared the business up to do things quickly. So for us, that means more brands, more marketing spend, more markets, all that type of stuff. Like how big can we get, how fast, using how much capital? If we can burn through $50 million in 9 months and get 3x growth, that's a win, right?
Yeah.
So obviously that shifts, and there's like a much more of a focus on fundamentals, and so you start to have this view that like growth is still important. I don't think you can ever escape being in a venture-backed business. Like,
of course.
So the minimum you can probably be growing is 70% year on year, and then you're like, well, every dollar of margin that I can pull out at 70% year on year will help me with my ability to raise in the future. And so you're just building for a more structurally sound business, but one that is slower growing. And so we made that pivot in June of 2022. And like,
can I ask, so like your investors, and you've got some like pretty well-known Australian kind of investment.
Yeah.
And you got some international ones?
Yeah, Bond. Like known to be the Merry Makers Fund, and then New View, which is an NEA. Yeah, just like medium, like one large US growth fund and one medium-sized US.
And did you literally have conversations for those guys who are on your board or whatever, those investors who are like, the time of growth is over, like we want to see free cash flow or whatever, like or we want to see the prospect of free cash flow?
It's not that brutal. Like they're not like I got married in Sweden in the middle of last year. We had a board meeting the week before my wedding, and like through Q2, we could see the markets kind of continuing to fall apart. Like there was still talk in March that it was a blip and that it would come back. By June, it definitely wasn't coming back. And so the step that I had taken to kind of deal with that was that I had like signed a term sheet for $20 million of convertible of debt. So essentially just to give us a cash buffer to get through to what we thought was going to be a more stable point in the markets. That term sheet got pulled post-signing, which is like rare and annoying, which meant that at a board meeting, while I was in Sweden, we like made the decision that we had to kind of reduce our headcount costs by like 25%. So that was brutal.
You obviously see the markets collapsing. I know that it's obviously like everyone's talking about this kind of pivot from kind of growth to a more sustainable business or whatever. Are people on the blower to you saying that you have to change your business, or is it just you're just picking up on vibes?
So you're mostly picking up on vibes, and then like the way that the VCs tend to work, and I think the good ones in particular, they're pattern matching for you, right? So they're being like, elsewhere in the portfolio, this is happening.
Yeah.
Does this information help you? And then board meetings are where this gets pushed to an actual decision. And like, so you present scenarios. So I think we presented a more significant scenario of a cut, and then like a no cut scenario, pretty much knowing going into the middle one was going to be the one that we had to do. Have the discussion. In our case, the discussion was, what is the tolerable level of burn given a certain growth profile? So we were like, we're pretty confident we can continue to grow 100% year on year, but to do that, we will need to continue to burn, and like the burn will be a third of what it once was, but it won't be zero. And that's what people signed off on. And then the mechanism to get to that was our headcount bill was somewhere between $3 and $5 million a month range. That had to go down by 25% to get to a point of sustainability.
Okay, 25% is not too bad in the scheme of things.
Yeah.
I mean, I say that. This is people's lives, and, down around, we care about the worker. And obviously that's tough. Like,
and it's culturally, like I think the one thing that I have seen, and people spoke about this a lot during the cycle when it was happening, but companies that have had to cut twice, like, have just destroyed internal trust. And so, like, the cultural impacts of, because also a lot of these people who joined startups during the boom
the good
times,
years,
like, they went in with a perception that it was going to be like some kind of, rocket ship, like the risk 9 out of 10 startups fail mentality kind of had drifted out of our world and gone to like this, like, free breakfasts and
foosball tables,
shares,
you're all
and,
good. Yeah.
And rest invest. And, and like that disappeared overnight. So it was pretty brutal culturally for a lot of, like, I think what ended up getting termed like by the painful all-in people was like the like the tourists of the startup world.
Yeah. And do you feel like this is going to be the norm just for a while now? Is it like a full reset?
Yeah, I think like it's fair value. Like, I actually think the market is probably quite fairly priced in most cases now. Like, we've seen the best businesses in the world kind of start to accelerate their multiples again, but like, they're incredible businesses. Like, Meta is an incredible business. There won't be another one of those built. Like, we might get one of those built a decade for the next 3 decades. And so I think like they deserve the prices that they get, and then everybody else has kind of got strong elements and weak elements. Like, I think like the classic examples of like the Twilios of the world, where it's like they were crazily priced, and it was because they pattern matched to them like owning an important piece of infrastructure on the internet, and then it turned out that margin control in that infrastructure wasn't that good, and so they got crushed, and like they deserved it. And so I'm pretty happy with where the market actually has landed. I guess like the question is like, how many great ideas? I see a lot of seed stage companies. I don't see that many like truly venture scale ideas. And like venture scale is a high bar, right? And people often like don't understand how high the bar that actually is. But to take the variety of bets they need to take, the scale that those bets are going to get to has to be massive.
I mean, I think we mentioned it about like Google killing Google domains, where it's like, buying a domain from Google or whatever. Seems like it matches perfectly strategically with their business and blah, blah, blah. But at the end of the day, Google are interested in businesses that are going to have 1 billion users, and buying and selling domains, even though it matches so perfectly strategically with the rest of their business,
It's not a 1 billion user business.
is not going to be 1 billion user business and requires customer service. So
exactly, that's out.
if you want scale, you need to be thinking
a
big.
massive TAM, right? Like even individual versions of our brands are not venture fundable. No way is Pilot a venture backed.
So the venture fundable is a large percentage of people paying $99 a month or whatever to have a big or more. I don't know. I don't know what the Excel spreadsheets say. Is that
well,
what
like
you're
a
thinking?
fund return, right?
A vertical SaaS business that just does hair loss is not a business, right?
No, of course, right?
Yeah.
Of course. And actually, I think a lot of the point solution vertical SaaS businesses that were funded in the boom times on crazy multiples, TAM is going to be their problem.
Yeah.
If you're the company that solves, niche user feedback surveys post-purchase and you have raised at a $400 million val, it's there's never going to be enough profit in that business for it to justify that
If
price.
you do a single page website with a bunch of links that people put in their bio,
really, but the reason that's venture backable, right, is because
it's
it controls
e-commerce, blah, 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 blah.
Well, it controls an extremely thin, extremely high traffic part of the business. So if you two had come to me with that idea and you had 100 million users, I'd be like, well, maybe they can build out a layer of value in one of the two directions that they control, and maybe people will pay for that. And I'm willing to give you money to bet on that. And it's a zero or a unicorn, right? There's no in between filling tree. And that's cool. That's a good venture capital bet in my mind.
Yeah.
The shit venture capital bets are the ones where it's at max that was going to do 50 mil of revenue.
Yeah,
and I think that's where the category has made mistakes. And that's why I talk about breadth of ideas is are there actually enough?
Yeah. If you're a warehouse management kind of platform that's only for SMBs in the woodworking space or whatever.
Yeah. And we saw a lot of funding for that type of stuff.
Yeah.
Totally.
So is that the plan? The idea that we all kind of just have a subscription. If it's more than just hair loss and ED and etc., it's I pay one of Eucalyptus brands just to kind of full health and you
ideally
plug into the Apple API or whatever and get my
we're thinking concierge, right? So we're thinking I think the example that I like the best is okay, I am trying to get back into going to the gym and I want to understand A, firstly what supplements I should take, but B, I wake up one morning and my shoulder hurts. What do I do? I probably need to speak to some type of practitioner reasonably quickly, but so probably some practitioner who understands what's been going on for me and where I am in my journey. And that's probably going to a physio, but that could probably be done digitally. And then if there's a prescription that needs to happen because it's pain related, then that could probably be done digitally as well. And so we're thinking
it's not pay per. Well, are you thinking
no? I think membership is a good place to go if we can get there, right?
Yeah.
The reality of our business is because we do make these point solutions, the suite of brands may be enough. We may actually never have to get to something truly transformational for it to return decent dollars. We may just
weight loss is popping.
Yeah, but and also the other businesses are solid, right? None of them individually are very interesting, but the sum of them together, even X weight loss, is a big enough business to be I can understand why that's backable. If they can do 4 more wellnessy-ish businesses along the way, they might make it. But ultimately, the upside case, if you want to believe that we're a part of the Australian healthcare system over a 10-year timeline, is that we have to be providing a single place to get a wide variety of services in an affordable way, probably through some type of membership.
This is just probably should have asked this one earlier, but do you have any interface with private healthcare insurers and I guess Medicare generally?
So Medicare generally not yet.
Yep.
Private health insurers so we had a long conversation with NIB and then it just led to them buying one of our competitors.
Cool.
So that was, not the exact interaction you want as the first one. I think there is a problem for private health insurance, right? Where it's it's an industry where demand has fallen consistently over the last 20 years. Young people don't get any value for it. There's a cross-subsidy problem where young people have to cover the cost of old people.
Yeah, the death spiral.
Yeah. People refer to it as the private health insurance death spiral, definitely. Probably the wrong industry to using the death spiral.
Or the right one. Who knows?
Yeah, who knows? Yeah, it's probably appropriate. And so I think there is a fundamental question of what does coverage for young people's health actually look like?
So
and are any of them bold enough to...
Is that a plan, insurance?
I would say you have to solve the service problem first, right? So you have to be able to deliver large parts of people's discretionary healthcare for low cost to be able to then say, hey, I'll also take over your hospital cover.
Yeah.
But I don't think you can do the second one before you've done the first one.
Sure.
So if it all works, then yeah, sure. You know how there's that adage that all businesses end up as financial services businesses or all end up as payments businesses?
Or an ads business. It's the 3 things.
Yeah, they're the 3 things you can do. And so our version of that would be would be a payments business through insurance.
Got it. Yeah.
Actually, on the all businesses are, we have an ongoing kind of hypothesis that also another thing that all businesses are affiliate marketing in a way, and that leads me to Jenny Craig.
Oh yeah,
you guys bought them.
yeah. So
Bought a bankrupt business.
yeah, I'm happy telling this story because it's fine, it's done now. We found out they went bankrupt or going bankrupt. So the US entity went bankrupt, and then it's in receivership here and or in administration. We talked to the administrators. They're like, there's clinics, there's frozen food, and then there's the customer list and the brand. But actually, if you buy them, you'll get none of them because the US entity. There's no master license agreement between the US entity and the Australian entity, and we can't contact the US entity because it's in administration as well. So you'll have to take a bet that whoever buys it in the US is willing to work with you and work on a licensing agreement or whatever. And so we're like, oh, geez, that discounts the value of this entire thing. Well, maybe there's some value in the food. And then we bought a lot of the food, and the food was terrible.
Sure.
And you had to go to a Jenny Craig store to pick it up. So you couldn't even there was not even like a proper e-commerce infrastructure in place. And so
how many retail locations do they have now?
I think it was like something like 100 stores, 80 to 100 stores.
Yeah, right.
I mean, the cold chain is expensive, right?
Yeah, but they're doing it through contract manufacturing. So it's like, it's not, it shouldn't be that expensive.
Yeah. Last mile should be solved.
Yeah, it's kind of like yes. And so that discounted it again. And then we're like, well, there's some value in this. And then if we can, there's upside in negotiating with the new buyer to be able to see if we can build something. So we're thinking about like relaunching it as a food business again.
Oh, you are thinking food?
Yeah,
I mean, you do shakes and stuff, right?
Yeah, and I think what's going to become evident in this, like we were talking about it earlier, but like what's going to become evident in this like new age for weight loss is that like people need to get enough protein to stop the muscle atrophy happening. And so people need to get enough protein. They need to be going to the gym, or they need to be doing some exercise. And I think my muscle chef would be 90% men.
Yeah.
And I think there is my muscle chef for women, for middle-aged women that could do quite well, and maybe that's the place to take Jenny Craig.
Yeah, right.
Because when I saw the news, you guys had quite my immediate assumption was like, oh, is Jenny Craig, are you just getting them A, for the email list or the member list, and B, is it just becoming basically an Ozempic shop front, essentially?
Yeah, and I think that was our base case going in.
Okay.
And we found a bit more there than we had originally thought. So like I think brand awareness is crazy.
Email?
Yeah, no, we got the emails.
You got the emails.
Yeah.
Okay,
The people are getting the emails now.
Yeah.
And there's a pop up on the
What's
website.
What's the conversion?
It's like a very low conversion as you would expect straight out of the gate, because it's like they're getting emailed by a new entity. Yeah. But there's a process you go through to get that up. And we've actually been surprised by the open rate. Like open rate's been really high. It's like a 25-year-old email list. So
do you know like what the average age?
Yeah, it's like 55.
Yeah. Okay.
We did
Is
some
that a new
research.
demographic for you guys?
No, Juniper.
Really?
That's like kind of in the middle of Juniper's demographic. But
because Juniper does like menopause and stuff.
Yeah, yeah. So the trust for the Jenny Craig brand historically is just enormous. So like, and actually like, I don't know like how much attention you pay to those like marketing numbers, but people say that there's like a percentage point of brand awareness is like there's often thrown around that like it costs $1 million to build a percentage point of brand awareness. And I don't necessarily think that's wrong. I think it's much less than that, but it is expensive. And so to be able to get some form of deferred trust from that brand, I think it has some value to us, and we were happy with that making the investment case.
Yeah, nice. So, like, what do you think about then Twitter rebranding to X? How many percentage points of brand awareness?
My only real take there is that like it feels like an incredibly rich person who is extremely uncool being like, well, I can do this.
Yeah.
Like I will buy the whole class lunch, you know, and it's like, but like I will not only that, I will actually change the social structuring of the whole thing so that the people that I like are, and the people that revere me are preferential treatment. And it's like, that's an extremely weird thing to do, but whatever. It's not a huge amount of money for him. It's like, what, 4% of his net worth?
Yeah, that's the thing, yeah. So do you, right now on Down Round, guarantee that you will not restructure the entire organization and buy a brand to make you feel cool?
It's not out of the question.
So no.
I mean, I've sponsored some sporting teams out of a demand to involve myself in those teams. At some time
that is a classic rich person kind of move.
Yeah. You're prepping yourself well.
No, but we sponsored the Cronulla Sharks, and it's actually been incredibly good. We've done two
with which brand?
With Pilot. So we did Richmond and Cronulla Sharks last year, and like Richmond as a test for like the prestige known brand in Australian sport, and Cronulla Sharks for like a little bit of the more let's see how it goes, much more willing to work with you organization. And they've been actually so good to work with. Because all that you really care about now is like, are they willing to make content for you? And like the Cronulla Sharks will make any piece of content you ask them to make and distribute it and help you with it. And then the prestige brands are like, oh God, no, we will not associate with that. It's like, well, we're paying you money.
Yeah, right.
So I think the future of actually sports sponsorship was, I think it's like the Wrexham thing, right? Where it's like, if you can own a bit of a narrative around a sporting organization and really build it with them, there's much more to be gained there than paying, what are historically the prestige brands. So Cricket Australia, the big 4 AFL teams, Brisbane Broncos. I feel like people will pay less for that in the future and more for stories that they can really be a part of.
Like 9 Now.
Yeah, like 9 Now. Yeah.